Can we have multiple lives? The multiverse theory. Imagine waking up one day and everything seems a little different. Your apartment is exactly the same, but the little details are off. Objects are in different places. Someone says something happened that you don't remember. Is it just an illusion? Or have you jumped to another reality? For years, scientists, philosophers, and ordinary people have wondered whether our lives are the only version of reality. The multiverse theory assumes that with every decision you make, a new universe is created, one in which you chose a different path. Maybe in another world you never made the decision that changed your life, or maybe everything there turned out completely differently. The concept of alternative realities fascinates not only scientists, but also filmmakers and bookmakers. Popular science fiction productions show visions of worlds where people lead completely different lives. But is this just fiction? Or does science actually find evidence of the existence of other versions of ourselves? In this episode, we delve into the subject of multiverses and consider whether it's possible that we have more than one life, not in the sense of reincarnation, but through the existence of parallel realities. We'll learn what quantum mechanics has to say about this, what experiments are trying to prove the existence of other universes, and whether our consciousness could jump between versions of reality. Is it possible that infinite versions of you exist right now, living completely differently? Is your life just one of infinite possibilities? Or have some people already had glimpses of other realities? Ahead of us is a fascinating journey through the world of science, mystery, and the unknown. Part 1, the multiverse theory. What does science say? For years, scientists have been trying to answer the question of whether our reality is the only one that exists. One of the most fascinating ideas in this field is the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, proposed by physicist Hugh Everett III in 1957. It assumes that every time we make a choice, even a small one, like whether to drink coffee or tea, the universe splits into two or more alternative versions. In one, we choose coffee, in the other, tea. In quantum reality, particles can exist in several states at once until they are observed. This is the famous Schrödinger's cat experiment, in which a cat in a box is both alive and dead until you look inside. Everett argued that instead of one reality deciding on one version of events, all possible versions of events exist simultaneously, but in separate parallel worlds. This would mean that in another universe, you live a completely different life. Perhaps in one reality, you made the decision to move to another country, and in another you stayed in your hometown. Maybe in one reality you became famous, and in another, you lead a completely ordinary life. Can we check this? While the multiverse theory sounds fascinating, scientists still have no way to directly confirm it. But there are experiments that suggest reality may be more complicated than we think. For example, the double-slit experiment, in which particles behave like both waves and particles, suggests that observation affects the outcome of the experiment. Some physicists suggest that this could be a sign of parallel realities interacting. Does this mean we have more than one life? If Everett's theory is true, then there are an infinite number of versions of you living in different versions of reality right now. And if so, can our consciousness somehow move between these realities? We'll try to answer that question in the next section. Part 2. Is it possible to transfer consciousness between realities? Let's assume that the multiverse theory is true, and that every possible decision you could have made created a different version of reality. Is it possible that our consciousness could transfer between these worlds? Some researchers and philosophers suggest that consciousness is not strictly bound to one body and one timeline. One of the most intriguing approaches is the concept of quantum consciousness, developed by physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. Their theory is that consciousness may be the result of quantum phenomena occurring in the microtubules of neurons in the brain. If this is true, then our consciousness could theoretically drift between different realities if it could find a way to switch between them. Popular culture often features stories of people who claim to have jumped into another version of reality. Stories of people waking up to a world where the details of their lives seem different are surprisingly common. Are these just false memories, or have their consciousness actually shifted to another version of reality? There are also experiments that suggest that our perception of reality is not as stable as we think. Some studies on quantum consciousness suggest that an observer can affect reality in ways that are not yet fully understood. If consciousness can affect reality, can it also change its location in the multiverse? This question remains unanswered. But if consciousness is more than just a biological process in the brain, then perhaps we do have the ability to jump between versions of reality, though we don't yet know how it works. Part 3. Science experiments. Can we detect other universes? Multiverses are a concept that has fascinated physicists for years, but is there evidence that they exist? Can science somehow confirm that other, parallel realities exist beyond our universe? While we don't yet have definitive proof, there are experiments and observations that suggest that our reality is not unique. One of the most mysterious cosmological discoveries is an anomaly in the cosmic background radiation, or remnants of the Big Bang. Scientists analyzing maps of the microwave radiation of the universe have noticed certain areas that seem to have an unnaturally low temperature. One hypothesis assumes that they could be traces of a collision between our universe and another universe in the past. If this were the case, it would mean that different realities can touch each other, and the boundaries between them are not as rigid as we think. Another area of research that could provide clues to the existence of multiverses is quantum mechanics. The double-slit experiment, which shows that particles can behave like waves and particles depending on whether they are observed, raises many questions. Some physicists have suggested that the experiment's different results could be evidence of multiple universes, in which every possible outcome actually happens, but in a different place in reality. Experiments conducted at the Large Hadron Collider are also intriguing. Particles colliding at enormous energies can create unusual anomalies that do not fit known physical models. Some researchers speculate that perhaps these anomalies are the effects of interactions with other dimensions, or even other universes, that momentarily intersect with ours. If this could be proven, it would be the first physical evidence for the existence of multiverses. Some theorists also wonder about dark matter and dark energy, mysterious substances that make up most of the mass and energy of the universe. But we still don't know exactly what they are. There are hypotheses that dark matter could be the result of influences from other universes seeping into ours. Perhaps it's a form of matter that leaks from another reality, and we're just receiving its effects without yet understanding its true nature. While science doesn't have clear answers yet, evidence is starting to emerge in fields from cosmology to particle physics. We may be on the verge of a discovery that will change our perception of reality. If other universes do exist, the next decades of research could yield groundbreaking discoveries that will help us understand that our reality is just one of an infinite number of possibilities. Part 4. The Mandela Effect, Faulty Memory or Traces of Other Realities. Imagine one day discovering that something you remember so clearly never happened. What's more, thousands of other people claim to remember the same thing. This is known as the Mandela Effect, named after the false memory of many people who claim that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s, when in fact he was alive until 2013. Since then, the phenomenon has recurred in many other cases. People remember company logos differently, movie quotes that supposedly never sounded the way they remembered them, or even historical events that they thought happened differently. One of the most famous cases of this phenomenon is the change of a famous movie line from Star Wars. Many fans remember Darth Vader's famous line as "Luke, I am your father," when in fact it never sounded that way. The actual line in the movie is, "No, I am your father," which comes as a surprise to many. Psychologists explain this phenomenon as a collective memory error. The human brain is not perfect. Every time we recall a memory, we can unconsciously modify it. If enough people misremember a fact, that information can start to function as truth, even though it never was. However, some suggest that the Mandela effect may be more than just an illusion. There is a theory that it is a trace of a change in reality, perhaps the result of our consciousness jumping between universes. If multiverses exist, it is possible that our consciousness unconsciously moves between them, taking with it memories from the other version of the world. Perhaps in one reality a given logo actually looked different, but in another, not. Some go even further and suggest that the Mandela effect is evidence of reality manipulation. According to this theory, someone or something can consciously modify elements of history, and our faulty memories are merely traces of those changes. It sounds like a science fiction scenario, but some argue that it is worth considering whether reality is as stable as we think. Is the Mandela effect just a collective illusion, or a trace of another universe? Science can't yet answer that question unequivocally, but if reality can indeed change, an even bigger question arises. Can we consciously influence which version of the world we live in? Part 5. Can we control reality and change our lives? If the multiverse theory is true, and reality exists in an infinite number of versions, the question arises, do we have any influence over which version of ourselves we find ourselves in? Is it possible to consciously jump to an alternative reality, or shape our own lives to get closer to the version we consider best? Some researchers believe that consciousness can affect the world around us. Quantum mechanics already shows that observation affects the behavior of subatomic particles. What if a similar effect operates on the scale of reality? If every decision creates an alternative version of events, then theoretically we could consciously direct our choices to change the trajectory of our reality. In the 1970s, a Princeton University laboratory conducted research on the influence of human consciousness on lottery machines. It turned out that in some cases, people concentrating on a specific outcome could minimally influence the machines. Although the effects were subtle, they raised questions about the possibility of minds influencing the world around us. Some proponents of manifestation theory argue that conscious intention and focus can attract certain events into our lives. Perhaps not in the literal sense of science fiction, but by gradually directing our attention and actions toward a chosen goal. If there are infinite versions of ourselves, is it possible to shift toward the reality that suits us best? There is no clear answer to this question yet, but one thing is certain: our choices matter. Even if we cannot literally jump between realities, each decision we make can lead us to a different version of the future. Maybe this is our way of influencing our own reality. Throughout this episode, we've been wondering whether our lives are the only version of reality, or whether there are infinite versions of ourselves living different stories. The multiverse theory suggests that every decision we make creates a new reality, and science is starting to see the first signs that this may be true. If there are other versions of ourselves, what does that mean for us? Do we have the ability to influence the reality we find ourselves in? Or is our consciousness constantly shifting between universes, but we are unaware of it? For now, the answers remain ambiguous, but one thing is certain: the world we live in may be much more complex than we think. Perhaps our choices and the way we think affect the reality we find ourselves in. What do you think about this? Is the multiverse theory true? Let me know in the comments, subscribe if you want, and see you in the next episode of Unknown Tales Files.